Hey, welcome back. What we're going to talk about today is how to do a lab report. You guys are going to see this lab report format over here on Canvas, and this is what we as the science department, you may have seen it last year in chemistry, you may have seen it in biology. If you've had my classes, we've talked about it. But this is the official East Noble High School Science Department lab report format. So when you're doing a lab, this is the format that we want to follow. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take an old lab that's very similar to the one you're going to be doing now, and I'm going to just simply be adding to it. So what I advise you guys to do is, this is how I would do it, is I would do a split screen, and I would just simply be adding things as I need. I'd have my checklist to go through over here, and then over here I'd have my actual lab and whatnot. So, okay, as I begin here, lab report, golden rule, you may not use the words I, we, or our, mine, theirs, etc. Example, this would be wrong, our data revealed a trend in percent testing. The correct way would be the data reveals a trend in percent solid testing. So there's kind of our golden rule when it comes to lab reports. So let's get into the lab report here. Title, all right, you need to have a descriptor title. So it's the measurement lab. And then things you should have underneath that title then, or with that, you could say, I'm going to say John Smith, and it is, whatever science class you're in, whether it's dual credit physics or just regular physics, you can just simply type physics, it doesn't really matter. I didn't put a date in there, so let's put a date in there as well. This is August 10th, 2018. And then science class, you might say physics. I'll just type physics in here because most of you are going to be in either dual credit or other type of physics. Purpose. All right, so introduction here is my next thing I'm going to go through. I don't have an introduction here, so I'm going to simply type in introduction. Now, I'm not ready to type an introduction because this should be done last. You can't tell me about the lab until you've done all of the lab and did all of your data. So in this introduction, we would go through this, but I'll say that to last. So I've typed introduction here, but I got to come back to it. Purpose, all right? So purpose, this is the nice thing about purpose, is almost all of your labs, I'm going to have your purposes for you. So in this case, these are the things that we're trying to do in this lab. All right, there's these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are the 6 purposes. When the lab's over with, these are the 6 things that you should be better at. Equipment materials, I'm going to always have that done for you as well. Well, I shouldn't say always. Most time I'm going to have that done for you. Procedure. Do not try to change the procedure. Leave the procedure alone. All right. Every time I have students that either delete the procedure or they try to simplify it, leave it alone. Don't change it. So far, it's been pretty easy, hasn't it? All you've had to do is type in a title, your name, the date, and the class. All right. Now I'm down here to this analysis and data section. All right. So I'm going to go down here and include all data collected during the experiment in a clear and organized manner. So the nice thing is most of your labs, you're going to have these tables. All right. So what I'm going to go here is I'm going to put in, I'm going to change it where it says results to analysis and data. And tables. So my tables, this should be the first thing I use. It says units in a table should be in the column heading. Hey, I've got the units up here in the column heading. Look at that. All right. A table must include a sentence or two to summarize the data, noting any trends. Notice that as the volume decreases, the circumference increases. So this is an example. So in this case, all right, I'm going to go backtrack here again. I'm just trying to clean this up so I can get all of my data, this table, all on the same page. That's because this introduction up here. Alright, so we'll come back to that. So, anyways, after the table, so I'm going to type in, set up a note. So I'm simply going to say note And I'm just trying to see some information here. So I see that as my length, width, and height, as these numbers get larger, so is the volume. All right. So my note would be that as the length, width, and height increase, so does the volume. All right, some little note that says that you're actually looking at the table and trying to get from it what it says that you're supposed to do. Graphs. Each graph. So right here then is where I put my graph. All right. So it says each graph should have a title. So not all labs are you going to make a graph, but in here I'm having you make a graph. So right here then is where your graph should go. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit insert. We're going to hit graph here. In this case I'm having you make a scatter plot. So the I never really got to pick the type of graph. I'm going to go here. Chart type. Alright, XY scatter plot. Okay. So here's that graph from the data. We'll talk in other classes how to make that graph. Hopefully it's changing it. There we go, it changed it. Now, your graph obviously is not going to look anything like this. I'm sizing it down so that it fits the paper. But there's where I'd put this graph. Now that graph isn't going to look anything like what you have. The next thing then is calculations. Oh, after the graph, we should also have a note. All right, so this is moving it over right now. I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to click picture. I just change it really to any type of layout. There we go. Should not continue moving now. Come on, come on. There we go. Note. The y-axis, blah, blah, blah. So you would, have a note in there telling me what type of trend do you see with that. Here, I would put in my calculations. All right. Now, a common way of putting in calculations in an organized is to put in set up a table. And what I like to do here is type in the type here. So maybe I think you guys have to calculate in this one the volume. So I'm going to write volume in here. And then underneath that I might write the equation volume equals length times width times height. So I've given the equation. And then here I'm going to give an example of the work. I don't have to show every single example. All I'm going to do is give one example of how I found the volume, and then it's understood that's what we did to find all of the volumes. So we got 12.1, 12, and 11.9. So I'm going to say 12.1 times 12 times 11.9. And then the volume turned out to be, what was that volume? 1,000 centimeters cubed. I don't think that answer is correct, but you get the idea of how we would show our calculations. So in here we would give, if you had another example of calculations, another calculation, any calculation you do, you have to put an example of it. If there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you don't have to show all 6 examples. You have to show me one example of how you found volume, one example of how you found the percent air, and so forth. Anytime there's a calculation, you've got to show me one example of that. Now, the last thing then is the conclusion. Down here in the conclusion, all I'm doing is typing in conclusion, and we would start to address the conclusion. In the conclusion, you're going to tell me what you learned about these 6 purposes. This is the only thing you're going to address in the conclusion. So you're probably going to have to write 6, 8, 10, 12 sentences in your conclusion. The conclusion is what's going to take the most amount of time. As you tell me and explain what you learned about measuring the dimensions of several objects. What did you learn about calculating the volume? A good example is to use the data from your lab. You should not tell me about how you calculated the volume without using some of the data from your lab.